What does horror sound like? What does dread sound like? How does a composer begin to tackle the idea of bringing this character to life? Themes of obsession, voyeurism, and split personality were the central narrative pillars from which longtime Hitchcock collaborator Bernard Herrmann had to create his score for Psycho. Ambiguous harmony, dissonant intervals, stabbing strings. These are all the hallmarks of Herrmann's iconic score for Psycho. Through a combination of consonance and dissonance, Herrmann achieves a score representing both the sanity and insanity of one Norman Bates. Herrmann became known for having a less than modest character and has been immortalized by his quote, "Hitchcock only finishes a picture to 60%. I have to finish it for him." One of the things I love about Herrmann's and many other 20th century composers' scores is his affinity for luscious melody, which jars with much of the current state of film scores where melody is more often noted by its absence. Even within Psycho's jarring score, there are still moments of romantic melodious motifs that probably say more about the era of the film score than invoking a sense of fear or dread. In order to be successful, a film score must be inextricably linked with the accompanied visuals on screen. As Herrmann has said in the past, he can't work simply from a script and needs to see Hitchcock's visual interpretation as a starting point. The notion to tie music and narrative together as one is considered to have emerged from Wagner's principles in his essay Opera and Drama from 1851. And because of this, it is important to understand the deeper narrative roots of Psycho to fully understand and appreciate Herrmann's score. The prelude is inaugurated with aggressive staccato stabs which set the tone for the film. The passage first comes in just before the parallel black bars intrude the screen during the title sequence. Bruce has described the aggression of these chords as anticipating mimetically the downward thrusts of Norman's knife. Although describing these as stabs is perhaps a little misleading, as this musical passage does not rear its head in any of the murder sequences, but only in two places in the film, during the title sequence and then again during Marion's drive. Because of the placement of these chords in the film, they relate less to a literal personification of violence, and more to the inner anxiety of Marion as she is fleeing in her car from Phoenix to Fairvale. These attacking seventh chords aptly depict Marion's state of mind. Speaking of Marion's drive, let's just take a look at this sequence of her driving after she leaves the car dealer. In a relatively short sequence, we see a somewhat unnerving transformation of Marion purely from her facial expressions. We hear the possible conversations she runs through her head of the policeman and the car dealer.
Heck, officer, that was the first time I ever saw the customer high pressure the salesman.
As well as her boss and her co-worker.
Carolyn, Marion still isn't in?
No, Mr. Larry, but then she's always a bit late on Monday mornings.
Buzz me the minute she comes in.
What starts as an expression of unease and apprehension, which is congruent with what the audience has seen thus far, soon fades until we see what looks more like a wry smile of satisfaction come across Marion's face, a suggestion that this character may not be entirely what she seems. Herrmann supports this sequence with the main prelude scored underneath to reinforce a feeling of uncertainty. The prelude and main theme utilizes the minor major seventh chord to devastating effects. The opening two bars are a relentless hammering of thick homophonic textures which punch through a B-flat minor major seventh in second inversion. This is the perfect musical device to underpin the character of Norman Bates. Harmony that is built by the dissonance of both a minor chord and a major seventh note, i.e. two conflicting musical ideas to convey a character with two conflicting personalities. A narrative theme that is more of a sub-theme in Psycho is that of voyeurism and characters observing others from a position of self-concealment. This is a theme not only in Psycho but also in other Hitchcock works, most notably, of course, Rear Window from 1954. However, in Psycho, this idea comes firstly from the opening shot after the title credits, where the camera is panning over the Phoenix skyline, where it then finds the window of the hotel room of Marion and Sam. The camera then, just as the audience does, creeps into their room and into their lives. Accompanied by these visuals is Herrmann's cue, The City. The motif is reused when Marion becomes the onlooker from her room in Bates Motel when she has been listening to Norman and his mother, and subsequently watches Norman walk down from the house.
No, I tell you, no. I won't have you bringing strange young girls in for supper.
The quality of this cue musically supports the ideas on screen that one character knows more than another, thus being an apt accompaniment. It is the subtly disguised dissonance that illustrates this notion best. The murder cue, whilst having been elevated in cinema's history as possibly the most renowned, is, in reality, a fairly straightforward cue that is just extremely effective, leaving a significant sense of dread with the audience. Whilst analysts attribute the shrieking dissonant violins to the stabbing of the knife or the screams of Marion, Herrmann's explanation of what it represents is more abstract, simply terror. The opening screeching of strings entering a bar at a time simply makes use of the most distant interval, a semitone. The increase of dissonant notes creates the terror which Herrmann was trying to achieve. Upon repeat, the cue is exaggerated by the instruction of glissando, informing the musician to glide to the written notes, which further exaggerates the piercing screeches of these strings. Whilst it's hard to believe now, Hitchcock originally argued against music in the scene, an argument that was probably lost as soon as the first bar of the murder score cue was heard. Combined with repetition to cement these motifs and rhythmic patterns in our head, the audience could simply listen to the movie without any visuals and still successfully succumb to a feeling of dread, unease, and ultimately horror. Whilst there is clearly a notion by Herrmann to deliberately evoke the chaotic nature of the story via the medium of sound, with a closer look we can see that hidden amongst the chaos there is structure within the Psycho score. Even the decision to orchestrate solely for strings, removing the rest of the orchestra, brings a unique characteristic to the score. A decision made once Herrmann knew Hitchcock wished to shoot in black and white. Again, a decision that is motivated by the visuals. The rest of the orchestra being removed parallels the stripping of colour from the picture. What at first glance may appear to be appropriate but arbitrary musical decisions, in fact have a very clear foundation in reflecting both the visuals and the thematic threads of the story. When the score has such a significant part to play in the film, it's no wonder that Hitchcock had so much faith in his composer.